In this chapter, we'll dive into the wonderful world of PHP functions. PHP has a huge range of built-in functions designed to perform predefined tasks, such as converting a string to uppercase, getting the dimensions of an image, sending an email, and so on. In this video, we'll look at the basics of working with functions. And in this file, functions.php is an example of a built-in PHP function. It's PHP version that reports the version of PHP that's running on your server. The first thing to note about all functions is that after the function name, you'll always get a pair of parentheses. The parentheses are like an operator that tells the function to execute its predefined task. But if I load this page into a browser, I get a blank screen, and that's because most functions return a value, but unless you do something with it, it's simply thrown away. So we could display the value by using echo in front of PHP version, and that will then display the value that's returned. So if I load that into the browser, it now displays the version of PHP that I'm running. That's okay if you don't want to use the value again, but more often than not, you'll want to save the value that is returned by a function. And you do that in exactly the same way that you assign any value to a variable with the assignment operator. So we can capture the return value of PHP version by creating a variable and then just using the assignment operator. And then that value will be available for use anywhere within the script. With PHP version, there's no need to add anything between the parentheses, but most functions expect you to pass one or more values as arguments. So let's see how that works. I'm going to create a variable to store my name, and then just imagine that my caps lock key has got stuck. Everything is in uppercase. To convert it to lowercase, I can use a built-in PHP function called str to lower or string to lower. So let's echo string to lower, and then we pass it name as the argument. Then I'm going to display a line break, and then the value of name. So if we save that and reload the page in the browser, there is the value that has been converted to lowercase, but here is the value of name. It's the original value of name and it hasn't been changed. To change the value of a variable when you pass it to a function, you normally need to assign the return value back to the original variable. Alternatively, you can assign the return value to a different variable, allowing you to preserve the original value as well as the amended one, and very often that's quite a useful thing to do. A really cool feature of PHP functions is the ability to pass one function as an argument to another function. String to lower has converted my name to lowercase, but ideally I want the first letter to be uppercase. And there's a built-in PHP function that does that. It capitalizes the first letter of a string, and it's called UCFirst. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out lines 6 and 7, then add in a bit of extra space, and I'm going to reassign the value back to name, and then call the UCFirst function, and between the parentheses there, I'm going to add not name, but the string to lower function, and then I'm going to pass name to that nested function. And if we save that and reload the page in the browser, that has now converted my name to lowercase, but it's also got that uppercase first letter. So what has happened here is I've passed name as the argument to string to lower. That has given us a return value, and that return value has been passed immediately to the UCFirst function, and the return value of UCFirst is then captured in name. This type of construction can seem rather confusing when you're new to PHP, but it's a very common and very powerful aspect of the language, so it's something that you will encounter quite often. Some functions take optional arguments, so let's take a look at that. Switch to this other file here, strip_tags.php, and this defines a string called input, and it's the type of input that might have come from an online form, and then we simply display the value of input. If we look at this, it's got some HTML in there. It's also got some script tags, so that's JavaScript. If we load this into a browser, it immediately executes that JavaScript. Now this is fairly harmless, just saying gotcha, but it could really have been a malicious script. And you need to take great care when processing input that has come from an online form. You've no idea where it's come from. You could be subject to an attack. One way to deal with this type of problem is to use a function called strip_tags. So if we pass input to that function, strip tags, then save and reload the page in the browser. This time that JavaScript is not executed. We see alert gotcha here, but the JavaScript is not executed because if you right click and view page source, you can see that all of the tags have been stripped out. That's why we don't get the JavaScript executed, but nor do we get any of the HTML. And strip tags takes an optional second argument that will allow you to keep in some HTML tags. So let's just close that, and then we'll have a second argument to strip tags. So a comma, and the second argument is a string with the opening version of the tags that you want to keep. So we'll keep paragraph, and we'll keep A for the links. And if we then save that and reload this into the browser, now the HTML is preserved, so that link is still clickable. And if you click that, it'll take you to the lynda.com PHP tutorial. So please take a look at that. In most cases, functions don't change the original value of any variables passed to them as arguments, but there are some exceptions, and there's an example of that here in this file, sort.php. At the top of the page is an indexed array. It's not in alphabetical order, but if we pass the array to the sort function and then save and load this into a browser, it automatically sorts it in ascending order. And in fact, if you were to try to get a return value from the sort function, it wouldn't give you the sorted array, it would only give you Boolean true or false to say whether it's managed to sort it or not. This type of behavior is known as passing an argument by reference, and I'll discuss that in more detail later in this chapter. And there's another function which works in a similar way. It's called rsort, which does a reverse sort. So if we save that and reload the page in the browser, the array is now in reverse alphabetical order. We've only begun to scratch the surface of PHP functions. PHP has a vast number of built-in functions, and they perform a wide range of predefined tasks. The function name is always followed by a pair of parentheses. Most functions take one or more arguments that you pass to the function as a comma-separated list between the parentheses. In the vast majority of cases, the original value of variables used as arguments remains unchanged, so you need to display the return value immediately or capture it in a variable. It's important to know the type of return value to expect from a built-in function, and the best way to find out is to consult the excellent online PHP manual, and we'll look at that next. A major complaint about many open source projects is the lack of decent documentation. Fortunately, that's not the case with PHP, which has an excellent online manual. This is the English language version, but it's also available in many other languages. Just use this Change Language menu here, and you can choose the language that you want to read it in. It's available in French, German, Japanese, and many other languages. This is a brilliant resource, and you should make a habit of visiting it whenever you need help with PHP. The problem for beginners is knowing where to start, because there's just so much information here. But this chapter is devoted to functions, and this is one of the most important sections, the function reference. So let's go and have a look at that. And the function reference lists all of the built-in functions organized into a large number of categories. And I recommend that you start down towards the bottom what we need to find is text processing. There it is, and it's strings that's important. Also in the next section, variable and type related extensions, you've got a link to arrays. But let's take a look first at strings. And this lists all of the string functions in PHP. They're listed here in alphabetical order, and the name of each function is a link, and each function is described briefly with a single sentence. Let's look for strip tags. There it is. Click that link and it takes us to the documentation for that particular function. At the top here it lists the versions of PHP in which you can use this function. When I was recording this video, PHP 7 was still in the process of being finalized, so PHP 7 hasn't been listed here yet, but it will be because strip tags is available in PHP 7. The description tells you how to use the function. This is the name of the function. It's preceded by the data type that is produced as a result of using the function. In the case of strip tags, it's a string, and then between the parentheses is a list of parameters. These are the values or arguments that you need to pass to the function. Some functions don't take any arguments, some take only one, while others take multiple arguments separated by commas. In the description, each one is preceded by its data type, so the first argument to strip tags must be a string, and the second argument, allowable tags, is also a string. Allowable tags is surrounded by square brackets. That indicates that this is an optional argument. You don't actually use the square brackets when passing an optional argument to a function. This is merely a convention that's used in the documentation. And then the parameters section lower down describes the arguments in more detail. The first argument is the input string. That's the one that you want to strip the tags from. And the second optional argument, allowable tags, is a list of the tags you want to leave in. Further down, we've got return values, and that describes what you get back from the function. In this case, it's just the stripped string. In the vast majority of cases, functions don't change the original value of variables passed to them as arguments, so you need to capture the return value either in a new variable or reassign it to the original variable. And most functions, the documentation also has some worked examples showing you exactly how the function is used. The other functions in the same category are listed on the side, and these are all links, so you can use these to go to other string functions. If you know the name of a function but you don't know where to find it, you can use the search field at the top here. So let's search for sort, and it gives us several options there. Let's click the first one, and it takes us to the documentation for sort. So it tells us that it's going to sort an array. The most important thing about this particular function is the ampersand, which precedes the first argument or parameter. This means that the function changes the original value of the variable that's passed to it. So the sort function permanently changes the order of the elements in the array. And the return value here is shown as bool, which is short for boolean. It simply reports whether the sort succeeded or not. That's why you don't need to capture the rearranged array in a variable. The optional argument here, sort flags, is followed by an equal sign and then a value. When an argument is followed by an equal sign and a value like this, it means it's the default value of the argument. So if you don't use that particular argument, it will use this default value. In this case, the default value is all in uppercase. Let's just scroll down and take a look. And under parameters here, it tells you that the sort flags are these PHP constants. In other words, they're fixed values and they're case sensitive, and they mustn't be enclosed in quotes. If you want to combine two constants, you need to separate them with what's known as a bitwise OR operator, which is a single vertical pipe. And there's an example of how to do that. If we scroll down, it's in example number 2. Here we've got two constants that are being passed as the second argument, and they're separated by this vertical pipe. That's the bitwise OR operator. So that's just a quick look at how to understand the documentation in the PHP Online manual for the many built-in functions. Most functions return a value that you capture in another variable, but others, such as sort, directly affect the original value passed in as an argument. Even though PHP has a large number of built-in functions, you'll often find you need a feature that doesn't already exist. And if you're likely to use that feature often, it's a good idea to define it as your own custom function. So let's create a custom function to convert seconds to minutes and seconds. To define a custom function, you use the function keyword followed by the name you want to call the function. So function and then the name. That needs to follow the same rules as for a variable. In other words, it can't begin with a number and should consist only of letters, numbers and the underscore. I'm going to call it convert to minutes, and I'm using camel case there. Now you need to be careful that you don't choose the name of an existing function. I happen to know that this one doesn't exist, but it's common practice to prefix custom functions with a combination of 3 or 4 letters followed by an underscore. Again, you mustn't use a combination that's already in use, such as str, which is used for string functions. So I'm going to use lyn for lynda.com. So lyn underscore and then convert to minutes. After the function name, you need to add a pair of parentheses, and between those parentheses, any variables that you want to treat as arguments. And if you're going to use more than one argument, you separate them by commas. We need only one argument, which is the number of seconds. So we'll call it seconds. And then a pair of curly braces. And between those curly braces, you add the code that you want the function to run. We need to start off by getting the remainder by dividing the whole number of seconds by 60. That will give us the number of seconds that we've got left over. So we'll call that sec. And then it's the number of seconds that have been passed to the function, the modulus operator, and 60, which is the number of seconds in a minute. Next we need to get the number of whole minutes. We can do that in PHP 7 using the intdiv function, but the intdiv function won't be available if we're using an earlier version of PHP. So let's have a conditional statement to check to see if intdiv exists. So if, then the condition in there will use a built-in function called functionExists, and this takes as its argument a string which contains the name of the function that you want to test, so that's intdiv. If intdiv exists, we'll use that to get the number of whole minutes. So min equals intdiv, we're passing it the whole number of seconds to the function as an argument, and the second argument is 60, which is the number of seconds in a minute. That's fine if we're using PHP 7, but if we're using PHP 5, we need to do the calculation manually. So else, then another set of curly braces, and in there min equals, then we need to deduct the amount of seconds in the remainder from the whole number of seconds and divide by 60. Because division takes precedence over subtraction, we need to have the first part of the calculation in parentheses. So seconds minus the remainder and then divided by 60. So that will give us both the number of seconds and the number of whole minutes. But if the number of seconds is less than 10, we need to prefix it with a 0. And we can use the ternary operator for that. So we'll reassign everything to sec. Then the condition will be sec is less than 10. Then for the ternary operator, the question mark. If it is less than 10, we need to have 0 as a string and then concatenate the value of sec onto that. But if it's greater than 10, all we need to do is to reassign sec back to the same variable. So this is all the calculation that's going on inside the function. We need to return a value, and you do that with the return keyword. And we'll use a double quoted string, and it will be min followed by a colon. You can't have a colon in a variable name, so this will be a literal colon, and then sec. So we can now test our new function. What we'll do here is to echo, and we'll use our function lin convert to minutes. Then we'll pass it, say, 547 as a value, and then save that and load this into a browser. And it tells us that 547 in seconds is 9 minutes and 7 seconds. Now we always need to test functions to make sure that we're getting the results that we want. Let's try this with a negative number. Just put a minus in front of 547, save and reload. And we immediately see that there's a problem. We've got the minus here, which is correct, but we don't want the minus in front of the seconds. To get rid of the minus sign, there's a built-in PHP function called abs, ABS, that returns the absolute number. In other words, it strips off the minus sign if a value is negative. Ideally, we should use it here on line 4, where we're getting the remainder of seconds. But that will affect the calculation if int div doesn't exist. So we need to add an extra line just before adding the 0. So a new line on line 10, and sec will be abs, and then we pass sec to it. So we're simply stripping off that minus sign. So if we now save that and reload the page in the browser, that minus sign has gone away, but it's kept here, which is in the correct place. When a function is used in the same file as its definition, it doesn't matter which order they appear in. We can call the function before its definition. So if I select the whole of this line 15, cut it to my clipboard, and then go to the top of the file, put in a couple of extra lines and paste it in there, save, and prove that I'm not cheating, let's try a different number in here. What should we have? Say 605. Save that and refresh. That tells us that 605 seconds is 10 minutes and 5 seconds. So that is working fine. But this works only if the definition of the function is in the same file as you're calling it. In the next chapter, we'll look at working with external files. And if the function definition is in an external file, the external file must be loaded first before you can use the function. So all you need to create your own custom function is to wrap a block of PHP code in a pair of curly braces and use the function keyword and then give your function a name. If you need to return a value from the function, you use the return keyword. When creating a custom function, remember to test it thoroughly to make sure you don't get unexpected results.